Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. First, thanks for visiting my channel. I really appreciate that. If you wouldn't mind, make sure to hit the like button before you leave. That helps me out quite a bit. Special thanks to those people who've been contributing to my channel. I have added a link, buy me a coffee up at the top and also in the video description. So if you feel so inclined to help support someone who's making content for YouTube, I'd appreciate it. Also, I love to have comments and suggestions on the videos, and I really enjoy having discussions about various aspects of silversmithing. So I have a contract piece today. So it's one of my friends asked me to make something for their daughter for Christmas, I think, and it's going to be a basket setting sitting on top of a ring that has kind of some little scroll work going through it. And I'm going to put an amethyst in it. It's an emerald cut amethyst. And so that's going to be our project today. So here's that amethyst I was talking about. I think it's a pretty one. It's a little on the paler side, but it's got a nice cut to it. It doesn't have a lot of inclusions, so I think it'll make for a pretty ring. We're not going to need much in the way of supplies here. We're going to need some 18 gauge round wire, and this and a little bit more here, and some 14 gauge round wire, and that's pretty much all we're going to need for silver supplies. As always, I use hard silver solder for all of my solder joints, with very few exceptions, and we won't be needing that anything besides that today. One of the more frequent questions I get is what kind of spray-on flux do I use, and it's My-T-Flux from Rio Grande. So just save you the trouble of asking me. Alright, so let's get started. We're going to make a basket setting for this first. And to do a basket setting, I'm probably going to use this magnesia block. It allows me to poke things into it, and that makes it easier to do things that are perpendicular to each other, which in this case we're going to have prongs holding this in place. So the kind of setting I'm going to do here is going to have two little rectangular rings, one above the other, with 4 prongs attached to both of those. So at least in theory, that's what I'm planning on doing. So let's see if we can't make a couple little rectangles. The first one needs to be just slightly smaller than the size of the stone, or pretty much exactly. So if I set the stone on top of it, you can't see it. So that would be the ideal size. So we'll start by doing a little bit of filing. Make sure I'm staying where I'm supposed to be with my hands. Definitely wouldn't, if you're making a rectangle like this, I wouldn't put the solder joint on a corner, because that corner will be different than all the other corners. So what you can do, though, is you can use a marker if you need to, in order to keep track where I need to make my next bend. Looks like about right. Down at the outer part of that there. That's pretty good. Okay. Might be a little too big. I can actually set this on top of the thing that I'm creating here. Might be easier to tell. See, I don't want to be able to see that wire sticking out, so I need to bend this in a little bit further that way. So I'm going to adjust where that bend happens a little bit. Do that by migrating the bend this way. If I grab it right on the corner and pinch so it's moving that bend this way a little bit. It's hard to explain that when you're not in person. The other thing I notice is it's a little bit too wide, so I'm gonna migrate this bend in just a little bit too, by pinching at a slight diagonal and moving it that way. Okay, that's pretty close. I'm gonna make a mark again. Okay. See how I overlapped it like this? That makes it easier to kind of get an eyeball size on it. And that's pretty good, I think. Let's cut that off. Right about where they meet. And see how it looks when I line them up better. I'm going to try and square these up just a little bit. One thing I'd suggest if you're new to this kind of thing, and this particular one's kind of a little bit more difficult project, probably sort of an intermediate to early advanced, because we're making our own prong setting, and that's a little challenging. I would suggest that one of the important skills, besides learning how to solder well, is learning how to shape your wire the way you want it to be shaped. It seemed like it took me a couple of years before I got very good at getting the wire to do what I wanted it to do. So just keep practicing at that, and maybe deliberately practice shaping wire into different shapes. And you start to get little tricks of how to hold it with the pliers, where to pinch in order to change the location of a bend. Those kinds of things are really, they come from just playing with the wire and experiencing how it reacts to how you put pressure on it and stuff like that. So I would recommend spending some time just playing with wire in order to get different shapes that you want. But I think that's probably close enough right there for this one. Second ring I usually make is of similar proportions, but I want it to fit almost inside of the other ring here. So I'm going to make another one of these. That looks pretty good. I find non-round shapes of prong settings to be relatively challenging, at least for me. That looks relatively proportional. Okay, so let's solder these two closed. I'm not going to use very big pieces of solder for this. Kind of might file off a bit of that extra solder. Okay, so what I'm going to need to do next is I'm going to get four pieces of this 18 gauge wire. Put this down here. Oh, actually, you know what I'm going to do first? On each of these corners, I'm going to file it kind of at a slightly upward angle like this. See if you can see that, make sure. So kind of like that on each corner. And I'm just trying to give a little flat place for that wire to rest when we put those prongs on there. This is when it's nice to have one of these softer kind of pads. It's called a magnesia block. I've never actually figured out why it's called that. I would estimate this ring will probably take a couple hours. So somebody asked me earlier how long these projects take, and it's hard to tell because I cut a lot of the boring stuff out of the middle, like me filing for 10 minutes or something like that. So most of the projects have been 2 hours or under that I've done for the channel. I'm guessing this one, 1.5 hours to to 2 hours. Okay, make sure you're seeing this here. So I'm going to take this and push one in, got it there. Let me spend a few minutes here getting this lined up how I want it to be. Make sure you're doing the smaller ring on the bottom too. Occasionally, I wasn't thinking, just went ahead and started doing the big one on the bottom. And later on, came to realize that. So the angles don't have to be perfect on these. I just try to get them similar if you can. More important that they're soldered into the same spot on each corner, not like way off center on one or something. Okay, so now we just got to try and pick solder each of those on there. Quite a bit of solder right here. Relocate it to that. We'll see how my soldering skills are doing today. Some days these are easier than others. The reason being, so these little wires sticking up are kind of exposed to the flame more so than that ring on the bottom. So they're a little bit vulnerable to melting before you ever get the bottom piece hot enough for the solder to stick to the bottom piece. So I kind of avoid the prongs themselves almost. Ooh, see how that one flopped over on me? That's not a fatal problem though, unless I totally melt one of them. So that was a near mess up, but we pulled it off, I think. Okay, like I said, this wasn't really a fatal issue. Okay, now how we need to file some little flat spots. On this step, I think I'm going to file like a slight notch in the middle of that flat spot that I just created so that the wire will have a tendency to ride in that notch. Okay, got a little notch on each of those. I'm going to snip off some of the bottom of this wires because I don't think I need them to be quite that long. Here, we'll snip them all the way off once we're done here. I just need enough to stick into the pad a little bit. I may actually straighten them out on the bottom a little bit. The reason I'm doing that is they were at an angle pointing inwards, and in order to stick them on the pad here again, it's easier to push it into the pad if they're all pointing kind of straight down. To get an idea of how far down I want it to sit on here, it looks like I can put it pretty close. It depends on the disparity between the upper ring and the lower ring. I made them relatively close in size, so I can put them pretty close together. Now what I'm going to do on the inside of these is attempt to file a notch about the same level. So it doesn't have to be very deep, it just has to be enough to catch that ring so it stops going down. You can kind of see I'm trying to get this so it'll sit right in there. If you need to, you should be able to bend those down a little bit, or to kind of keep it in one spot. That's hardest part, I think, is getting the two rings parallel like that. Now we have to solder these guys in. Go ahead and push this back into the pad. So let's get this fluxed and see if we can't assemble this all the way here. Just making sure I had solder joints all the way around. Looks like I do. Sometimes I even use anymore since my eyesight is not as good as it used to be. I'll use my loop in order to inspect the solder joints to make sure all 8 of them. And it looks like I got all 8 of them. So occasionally there will be one that I miss and it still looks like I got it, but that'll kind of usually detect it. So what I usually do next is I just trim these off the bottom. Just take your file. Okay, and these upper ones I need to leave a little longer than they need to be for now, but not nearly as like that. So I'm going to trim those off a little shorter, just so it's not so unwieldy. Okay, so we're good to go. Now we got a little basket setting. All right. These look surprisingly good once they're all cleaned up. So for the band, I believe, what did she say? Size 6 or 7. Well, let's go with 6.5. I'm going to have a ring that's a 6.5. So I'm going to center it around the 6.5. And we'll make it about 1/8 of an inch longer. Okay. So that's about how long we need it to be. However, if I incorporate this, so I could do this in 2 ways. I could make the ring I'm going to make, which is just kind of it's this sort of a band like this. Okay, and I could just mount it on top of it, but I think it'll look a little neater if I actually have these meet the sides of the prong setting. It looks all integrated as a single whole then. So I'm going to try and plan to do that. We'll see how well my plans come out. I don't know. Oh, so we got to deduct. Since it's going to be between the band instead of on top of it, we got to this bottom piece is going to play a part as part of the length of the size of the ring. And so we should subtract about that much. So actually the piece of wire that I'm going to cut for the sides of this is going to be about that long. And this is 14 gauge round sterling wire. I'm cutting them just slightly longer so I have a little fudge room. Okay, file the ends of these. I like these flat nose pliers for straightening wire. You just use them to hold things. You can actually bend stuff with them. Just gives you leverage, and it doesn't dig up the metal as much as needle nose ones tend to. Not perfect, but probably close enough. Okay, some 18 gauge. Okay, so I'm going to make little scrolls, but I need to decide how long I want them. And I'm thinking smallish because I have not a lot of room to space them out, so I want to get maybe 4 of them in there. So I'm thinking, well, let's cut a couple different lengths here. These ones are about 5/8 of an inch maybe. And then we'll cut one slightly longer. Notice I'm cutting an extra one each time. It's because if I decide that's the right length after I've bent it, if I wanted to know how long that piece was, I have something I can use to measure with then. Okay, so those are the longer ones, those are the shorter ones. I'm just going to make a little tiny loop on one side here, just like that. A loop on the other side. And then I'm going to flatten it out. And that's not a bad size. Let's see how these other ones would look. So you can see that's just slightly longer than that. So if I go 1, 2, 3, I might be able to get 5. I'll have to see. I'm going to do the shorter ones, I think. Just trying to get them pretty close to the same length so that the swirls are pretty consistent. And also, there's some room for chat error here too. So if I was mounting this on top of the band after I finish this band, I probably would be trying to adjust the length of these guys so that they went right to the edge here. But since we're going to attach it right to the bottom of this, or the side of this right here, I think it's okay if these stick out just a little bit, and that'll give me some room to play with the size if I'm not quite exactly on the size. But yeah, we're just going to solder them between those two wires like that. So I need to transfer them to a flattish, if I have any flattish spots left here. Okay, I'm going to use really tiny pieces of solder here so I don't get a lot of clumpiness in there. If you've never visited my website, it's at cvpsilver.com. You should check it out. There's some of the stuff I make on here is for sale there, as well as some other things. If you didn't get that address, it's up. There's a link to it at the top right-hand side of the YouTube channel page, and I think it's in the description as well. See why when I'm doing something like that, you can see why pick soldering is something you might want to consider figuring out how to do. If you want to, I'll put a link up there for my pick soldering video. It's basically me doing this though, so you just kind of saw it, but it gives a little more details about what makes it easier to do and stuff. So, okay, looks like I got them all. So let's put it in here. Squeeze this down just a tiny bit. The thing that I need to do though is since this is going to fit in here snugly like that, in theory, I need to file these kind of in a vertical way like that. Because right now they're kind of, if you look at the ends of the wires, you can see that they were filed flat at the end anyway, but now we need to angle them so that the prong setting will sit in here vertically. Sometimes you gotta fiddle with, sometimes it'll fit in there better one way than the other, so I was trying to figure out which side. It keeps wanting to pop out, which means this, I don't have something quite straight up and down usually, because it'll try to force it up or down. Okay, I'm just trying to get it to sit even in all dimensions inside of that. My two rectangles aren't perfectly aligned, but I've got it situated so that the top one at least is square with the rest of the ring, and so it should kind of conceal the other one. I usually try to create a platform where neither the band nor the setting in between the band can fall out while I pick solder this on. So this is kind of a delicate soldering operation. Most of the mass is down here in the band, so I'm going to focus most of my heat down there, and with a little luck I'll be able to get those two soldered, and then I'll switch this to the other side, and then I'll solder it from the other side. I'm going to cut myself a few bigger pieces of solder. I had a little something go wrong, so I'm going to stop and reevaluate for a moment. I think I got them all that time. I'm going to cool it off for a second. Okay, it looks like I got them all on there. I might need to do a little cleanup with the Dremel there, but it's at least sitting straight. Where did I stick that other guy? See how that's going to sit in there. I think that'll be pretty. Let's, I'm going to heat it up a bit. I'm going to pickle for a while, and then I'll clean it up and we'll set the stone. Got it mostly cleaned up. I did the inside with the Dremel, and I need to put the stone in here now. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look and see, looking right here, See the girdle meets the prong right there? So that's where I'm going to, on the inside of the prong, I'm going to file a little bit of a narrow spot there. So make sure that's sitting straight. First, I think I'm going to pull these in. So they're at the right spots. Just basically pushing these down over the corners as far as I can get them to go. This one's going to run into the other one. Snip it off just a little short. These are going to be cut off again before I'm done here. So I'm just basically laying them down as tight as I can along that top edge here. And you see that this facet that goes from the table facet down to the girdle here, that's your girdle facet, and we want to cut these off about midway up that. If you need to do any repositioning of the prongs a little bit, you can do it now. Sometimes I don't have them quite on there straight. Make sure they're pushing down pretty good. There's no space between them. And if I cut any of these too long or anything, this is where I'm going to snip them off just a little bit more, so they're a little more symmetrical. And then, very carefully, I'm going to round the tops of these prongs over. See how I'm using my thumb to kind of protect the stone? I usually drag my finger across to see how catchy it is. You don't want it to get caught on fabric and stuff. And this one, being a deep stone, does sit up pretty high. So some people wouldn't like that. Other people don't seem to care. Alright, so I think that's ready to polish. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. Alright, the final product. So you can see that. I'll try to get it a little closer so you can see how nice and sparkly that one came out. I was pleased with what came out. I wasn't sure how the swirl band would look on this one, but I think it looks pretty good. And that stone is just really pretty, standing up like that, sticking out with the height. It catches lots of light, so it's pretty sparkly. Alright, I'll take a better picture, put it at the end of the video. Okay, well, that was the basket setting with the swirly band. I hope you had a good time watching it. If you did, make sure to hit the like button. I'd love to have you subscribe to my channel. I'm putting out roughly 2 to 3 videos per week. I think it's valuable content, and I try to hit diverse topics in the silversmithing field. So I appreciate you coming. Make sure to subscribe, and if you're so inclined, I have a support me button up top that says buy me a coffee. You can contribute to my channel. Certainly not necessary, but I do appreciate it when you do. So thanks for coming and watching the video. Happy silversmithing. Take care.